It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about self-care and her book, It's Okay to Start With You, is clinical professional counselor, author, and speaker, Julia Hogan. Thanks for being here, Julia.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
So when I first saw your book title, I was thinking of the acronym JOY, which people will say Jesus first, then others, then yourself. So you are suggesting that it's okay to start with you. Is this a debate that's going on? Is putting yourself last dangerous, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I like to bring up the passage from the Bible when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And we tend to focus on the loving your neighbor part and taking that to mean, we need to care for others, which is absolutely true. But at the same time, we can't really take care of other people if we're not taking care of ourselves, right? Like, I can give you a small example, and that would be if I don't get enough sleep at night, and if I'm not eating, if I skip lunch or something, then when I'm working with clients, I'm feeling tired. My mind is wandering. I'm not as focused as I can be, right? But if I take the time to have lunch, and if I make sure I get enough sleep, then I'm fully present for my clients, and that's really serving them. Whereas when I'm tired or I'm stressed or I'm hungry, I'm not really there, and I'm not serving them in the best way that I can. And so there's sometimes that fear that taking care of yourself can be selfish, that you're focusing on yourself instead of other people like we're called to do. But really what I talk about in my book is taking that step back and making sure that you're meeting your own needs so that you can be fully present to other people and really serve them in the way that you're called to.
What do you think the cause of this kind of lack of self-care might be?
I think one of the biggest reasons is forgetting or not recognizing our own self-worth, and that self-worth that's rooted in God's love for us. I think most of us, I could say, feel safe saying that, have this inner critic in our head that's just whispering all these lies about how we're not worth taking care of, or we're not lovable, or why would anybody love us, and kind of closing ourselves off from God's love for us, right? And He loves us as we are right now, imperfections and all, right? He's not saying, well, I'll love you if you do this, or I'll love you if you do that, or because you made a mistake, I love you less. He says, I love you through it all. But we forget that, and so we deny taking care of ourselves a lot of the times because we don't think we're worth it, because we forget God loves us as we are, and so we should embrace that love and treat ourselves accordingly.
Do you think that religious organizations might make this worse sometimes?
Do you have an example, maybe?
Well, just with such an emphasis on helping others and putting others first, is there kind of a danger in some of the things that religious organizations, Catholic Church, might accidentally lead people astray?
I don't know off the top of my head any specific examples of that, but I do know I was reading Jennifer Fulwiler's new book, and she was talking about how in Mother Teresa's order, they placed a really big emphasis on self-care. So making sure that all of the sisters took time to pray and to eat regular meals and to get enough rest, because as we know, their work is so grueling and emotionally and physically draining, right? But she really placed an emphasis on that. And I just thought that was so cool when I read that, because I hadn't known that before. So when I came across that, I was like, this is so great. This is an example of someone who's so holy and is known for serving others, but she also recognized the importance of self-care. Right. And I think she's a great example of showing that self-care isn't selfish, because when we think of Mother Teresa, we think of her as being the least selfish person out there, right? Next to Jesus, probably. Right. And she's a good person to look to if you're ever feeling like, oh gosh, this feels really selfish for me to take time to rest or to read a good book or engage in a leisure activity or call a friend. Mother Teresa can practice self-care, then I can too.
Do you see this as an issue that comes up a lot with your clients as a counselor?
Yes, definitely. I would say a lot of the times before my client and I can even start working on the issue that they come in for, a lot of times we have to just start with the basics and how are you taking care of yourself. And for people who are experiencing depression and anxiety, there's lots of different causes of it and things that can make it worse. But things like getting enough sleep and eating properly and exercising, those have been shown by research to affect your mood. And so a lot of times what my client and I will do, we'll sit down and we'll come up with a self-care plan, and we'll say, okay, how can we make sure that you're taking care of yourself first, and then we can start addressing these bigger issues. So it's definitely something that I see a lot.
We're talking with Julia Hogan. Her book is It's Okay to Start With You, and is a great resource and emphasizes the need for self-care. And I imagine that this applies to certain personalities. Some personalities might actually sway the opposite direction, and somebody might be thinking of a friend or a spouse or something and say, well, they don't have an issue with this. They're lazy and they always are taking care of themselves and putting themselves before others. So is there a certain personality that might have issues with this more than another?
I think that when you have a focus on serving other people, so not necessarily a personality type, but I think that focus of serving other people can maybe overshadow that need to take care of yourself, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that I really wanted to write this book from a Catholic Christian perspective, just because I think a lot of, as Christians, we see our call to serve others, and that often we can brush ourselves and our own needs aside. And so I really wanted to show that there's a natural relationship between taking care of yourself and other people as Christians, and then Jesus wants us to do that. God calls us to do that. So I wouldn't say necessarily a specific personality type, but I think one question to ask yourself when you're making the decision whether or not to take time for yourself is, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I don't feel like interacting with other people or taking care of other people? Or is it because I know that if I'm not getting enough sleep, how am I going to be fully present, right? Or if I'm not exercising, I'm going to feel sluggish and down the whole day. So I know that I need to do these things to do the work that I'm called to do.
Can you talk a little bit about what is self-care and what maybe isn't self-care?
Yes, definitely. So self-care is definitely a term that is kind of a buzzword right now. I have a Google alert set up for my email, and I get so many articles every day, right, about self-care, but a lot of them are focused more on surface level type of practices. So, for example, getting a massage or going and getting a manicure or going on vacation. Mm-hmm. And those are good things to do, but that's not really addressing that. Do I really recognize that God loves me, and am I on the outside externally showing that, right? And that's through self-care. So there's different areas of self-care. There's spiritual self-care, physical self-care, relationships, emotional. I think I'm forgetting one too off the top of my head, but all of these focus on making sure that you are giving your body and your mind what it needs so that you can be a flourishing human being, right? That you can be the fullest and most authentic version of yourself when you are doing what God is calling you to do in the world. And so, with relationships, that means being in healthy relationships and investing in those, nurturing those, but then also staying away from unhealthy relationships and setting boundaries and learning to say no to things that maybe are overwhelming your schedule. And we don't like to disappoint people, but sometimes it's important to say no to something so you can say yes to other things. So, and that's what I do in my book. Is the first half of my book, I lay out why you should actually care about self-care, why it matters. And then the second half of the book, I include a self-assessment so you can see how you're doing right now with self-care, what areas you might want to improve on. And then I walk you through each area step by step and talk about why it's important and how to practice it in that area. And then at the very end, I show you how to create an action plan so that after you read the book, you have these manageable strategies that you can incorporate into your busy day so that you can start taking care of yourself right away.
So I imagine there's some people that are listening, they're saying, I'm so busy, I've got kids to take care of and work. I can't imagine being able to fit something else into my schedule, some personal time for myself or more sleep time. How do we fit this in if we're, quote unquote, too busy?
Yes, and we are all so busy. I totally understand that. And what I did in the book is I made sure to give suggestions and strategies that are very easy to incorporate. So one example I'll give you is often we tend to focus on the negative things that are happening in our lives and we forget about the positive, and that can really start to weigh down on us. And so one easy thing that you can do is creating a gratitude list. And all that is you can do it in your head while you're driving on your commute. You can jot some notes down in your phone, or you could keep a notebook. But all it is writing 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for that day. And they can be tiny little things, they can be big things. But the research shows that when you practice something like this, writing a gratitude list, it can actually boost your mood and increase your sense of well-being. So that's something that can take, it could take a minute, it could take 30 seconds. You could make it as long as or as short as you want. Mm-hmm. But it's strategies like these that I recommend in my book, because my whole goal is to give this information to everyone, to my readers, but then to empower them to use it and to see that it's something that they can do without completely altering their lives, right? It's something that they can seamlessly fit into their busy days, but then to also see results from it.
You've mentioned a couple times the importance of faith as a part of this. How does faith fit into the self-care practices? And is there maybe whenever you're talking about mind, body, and soul, is there a particular ratio? Is it exactly a third of each one, or is one more important than the other?
Well, I think especially for Catholics and Christians, and this is what I talk about a lot in the first part of my book, that if you don't have self-care, I should say it this way, self-care is really just sort of a Band-Aid, surface level fix if you're not doing it because of your knowledge that God loves you. So I described it earlier as self-care being the external sign of how you care about yourself internally. So if you don't really love yourself and you don't like yourself very much, you're not going to externally treat yourself in a good way, right? You're not going to, why should I get enough sleep, or why should I eat properly, or why should I exercise, or who cares if I'm in an unhealthy relationship? I don't like myself very much, so I don't deserve it. But if your starting point, again, is that internal recognition that God loves me as I am, and He wants the best for me, and He cares about me, and so I need to live my life in that way. If God loves me as I am right now, I need to love myself too, right? And so then treating yourself in a way that expresses that. So that means being in healthy relationships, getting enough sleep, practicing gratitude, all of those things. So I think, especially as Catholics and Christians, that knowledge of God's love for you is the first step. And so it's like that's the foundation. And then all of these other things build on top of that. And that's why it's so important to recognize God's love for you first. And that's really what I cover in the first half of my book, and lay out that rationale for why does this matter? Why should we be talking about self-care? How is this going to help me, right? So I think really like that spiritual foundation needs to be there, especially as Catholics and Christians, and then we can build those other things. Those come more easily.
Okay. At the end, you have a suggested reading list. It spans a lot of different topics. How did you put that list of books together?
Those are a lot of books that are on my bookshelf in my office. Those are ones that I've just found over the course of my work as a therapist and in my studies when I was in graduate school that have just been really helpful. I recommend them to my patients and my clients, and I think they're all good springboards for things that I cover in my book, because of course I couldn't cover everything. It would be volumes and volumes long. But for example, one of the books about Catholic mindfulness I think is really helpful, because you mentioned we live in such a busy world, and so Dr. Bottaro talks about how do you practice mindfulness as a Catholic, and how do you experience benefit from that in reducing worry and anxiety and stress and all of that. And so if that's something you're interested in more, that's a great resource to dive into. So that recommended reading list, I think, is a great springboard if there's a particular area of self-care that you want to learn more about and want to take a deep dive into.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. Where can people get a copy of the book and also follow up with you and see what you're up to and learn more about your speaking and writing and your counseling?
Yeah, for sure. You can get the book on our Sunday Visitors website, which is osccatholicbookstore.com. And then it's also on Amazon. And then if you want to get in touch with me, you can go to my website, which is juliamariehogan.com. And then also on Facebook, and then also on Instagram. But I post most of my stuff on Instagram. So if you want to keep up to date, I would say head over there, and that's Julia Hogan, LCPC.
All right. Again, the website's juliamariehogan.com, and the book is It's Okay to Start With You by Julia Marie Hogan. Thank you so much, Julia, for joining us today. This is so important. I hope a lot of people take your advice.
Thanks so much for having me, Kyle. I appreciate it.